Let me now go straight to the topic of the 18th Nuclear and Energy Forum. I was at its inception 18 years ago. Maybe it bothers some that I'm still here, but I'm glad that I'm in a completely different atmosphere than it was 18 years ago. I appreciate the enthusiasm. The commentator introduced the connection with the nuclear power plant. But it wasn't like that, and you know it very well. We remember decisions where common sense was lacking. And I have to mention the decision when the terms of Slovakia's entry into the EU were being negotiated. And part of these conditions was the closure of 2 healthy and modernized units of the nuclear power plant in Jasovské Bohonice. It was 2004, and I was scratching my head, for God's sake. What are we going to do? That's why having certain documents on the table means anticipating and making decisions for many years to come. We decided right during our first mandate, between 2006 and 2010. In the Italian company Enel, which was the majority owner of Slovak power plants at the time, we found supporters for the completion of the 3rd and 4th blocks of the nuclear power plant in Mochovce. I admit that probably, if 2 units had not been shut down, we probably would not have had the courage or any rational reasons to make the decision to continue construction in Mochovce. Madam Commentator, we were looked at as if we were crazy in 2008 when we announced that we were going to complete Mochovce. But we knew very well what an incredibly important role nuclear power plays in terms of energy security. That's why I'm very pleased that today we have the 18th year of this excellent international event, and we are meeting in an atmosphere where we talk about the core of labeling. What is good? Because if we are to talk about energies today, it is not enough to talk only about whether they are ecologically produced. It is not enough to just talk about whether they are affordable, although these 2 things are extremely important, and I will touch on them in my speech. We also need to talk about energy sufficiency, availability, and stability. This cannot be achieved without nuclear energy. Please, let's acknowledge that. And I very much welcome the General Secretary to this event, and I also thank the European Commission for significantly changing its stance on nuclear energy. We know that we have 2 important programs here. It is the European Commission's nuclear program from the summer. We have here the framework of state aid for clean industry. These are documents that we really need at this time, and which provide the assumption that the nuclear alliance that is here simply has its life and ability will be guaranteed in the basic documents of the European Commission, the European Union, the organization that we all support so much, and which the state is building with such enormous difficulties. It will be very important that you send a very clear message to the world from here on out. It will not work without nuclear. With all the risks that come with it, it simply cannot work without nuclear. Ladies and gentlemen, we recently held a joint meeting of the government with representatives of the automotive industry. There is enormous pressure on electromobility, which will create enormous pressure on other energy sources in Slovakia. If we consider that we already have 5 car manufacturers today, and we already produce 2.1 million cars per year, what is the pressure on electromobility? Then we have an estimate that our consumption may increase by 40 to 60% by 2040. We will need new sources for this. Moreover, Slovakia as a country must apply for data centers. But data centers also require a huge amount of electricity, of course. We will apply for battery storage. Of course, this again requires a huge amount of electricity. For this reason, I very much welcome the fact that the 3rd unit is up and running. The fourth unit, I assume, could also be put into operation early next year. Thank you all, it's not an easy thing. General, do you know how happy I am when steam pours from all those chimneys and over those Mochovci hills during the summer? That's what it was built for. And we know what it means for the energy security of the Slovak Republic. Let's move on. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to inform you that on September 10th of this year, the government signed and approved an intergovernmental agreement between the Slovak government and the US government because we want to use the infrastructure of the nuclear power plant in Jasovské Bavnice, and we want to build one more nuclear unit into pure state ownership, the output of which will of course be significantly greater than the 440 units we have, and it will be a unit with an output of more than 1,000 MW. I believe that this is a step that will be important, not only for Slovakia, but for the whole of Europe, above all for Central Europe. And if we all say that we will have a lot of effort and trouble in the post-war arrangement of withdrawal and assistance to Ukraine, this decision will also be extremely important for the future in this region. Someone may ask why we are going the way of diversification and looking for cooperation in other markets. We tried South Korea. For certain reasons, it ran into problems. The fact is that the most likely scenario is that, based on the agreement that we want to sign with the American government, which has already been agreed on the American side, there will be cooperation with an American supplier. But we would welcome it if the American supplier created a consortium that would see everyone. I understand that France would be happy to get involved. There are also other manufacturers who would see themselves in this huge multi-billion project. Slovakia is a country that not only knows how to build nuclear power plants. Yesterday, the General Director saw in Mochovce how Units 3 and 4 are being built, or how they are being completed. The third is completed, but I am talking about the fourth unit. And no one can dispute that we have people who know how to build nuclear power plants. That's a fantastic thing. But that's not all. We are a country that is also interesting because we know how to decommission nuclear power plants. We can even eliminate the consequences of nuclear stories from the 1970s. We don't want to talk about nuclear accidents. Let's call it, as we say, the heart. The heart story, the seed story. We're talking about the nuclear story. I must boast to you, ladies and gentlemen, about the shutdown in Jasovské Bohunice, what we have accomplished there. For example, in the summer, the largest components of the primary cycle were dismantled. It is very important that the contaminated concrete was removed from the pools where the spent fuel was stored. Then there were the boric acid tanks, which were also cleaned. And then we started dismantling these huge devices that were dismantling and cleaning all of it. 4,300 tons of contaminated material were cleaned there, with 98% efficiency. That's a huge success. I think the phase-out program in Jasovské Bohunice is a program for the whole world, and we need to make the most of it. We need to train as many people as possible, because we need to be as successful as possible in this part of the nuclear cycle. So thank you. I also thank the Commission for its cooperation in this challenging project. I call on all stakeholders in Slovakia who are responsible for the decommissioning in Jasovské Bohunice to make the most of this project to improve Slovakia's reputation, but also to show everyone that we are a developed country and that we are even one of the leaders, I might say the world leaders, in atomic energy. Although we are a country with only 5.5 million inhabitants, that is still not all. We are a country that is interested in being innovative. I welcome the agreement that Hovis, the nuclear decommissioning company, has signed with Nucleo in Italy. I was present at the signing of the relevant agreements. And it is not just that we are interested in creating and manufacturing these small modular reactors, or that we want to do some innovative actions. For me, the most interesting project of this cooperation is the creation of a center for the processing of spent fuel and its reuse. If we succeed in this, then again I can say that we will be a leader in innovation, and I look forward to cooperation. Thank you very much for coming up with this idea and for supporting it with your presence. Ladies and gentlemen, I began by speaking about common sense and expressing the hope that ideology will stop influencing decisions that are very important to us. There is an unfortunate document on the table called repowering. I think I don't need to hide, Madam Director General, because you all know my opinion on repowering very well. This is total nonsense. Both when it comes to gas and when it comes to oil, we are shooting ourselves in the foot. I am ready to argue with the European Commission on a 24-hour basis to constructively and positively convince them that this is a senseless ideological step. Please, European Commission, take off those anti-Russian glasses. If you take them off, then we will make decisions more rationally and normally. The biggest danger, Madam Director General, is if the idea of including nuclear fuel in this repowering comes true. While we can talk a lot about this, please talk about what would happen if someone told us one day that we could no longer take nuclear fuel from the Russian Federation. I think we can all agree that you can't just stick any rod into a reactor. I'm talking about a fuel rod. That probably requires, I'm not an expert on that, but at least I know that you can't put a Skoda engine in a Mercedes. It just doesn't work that way. Significantly, if this happens, you will jeopardize energy security in the European Union. On the other hand, isn't the United States of America taking a huge amount of enriched uranium from the Russian Federation? There, the ideology may not exist, nor does it work. But we are still putting that ideology into our decisions, which will endanger ourselves. Therefore, as the Director General, I openly say that we can never agree to repowering as far as January 1st, 2028 is concerned. That is, we are talking about gas. We will never be able to agree to make decisions that will damage energy security. If we consider that today we produce a little more than 60% of electricity in Slovakia from nuclear power, then we are talking about a country that is important from this point of view, not only for the territory of the Slovak Republic, but also for the stability of this region. Because, as I said, it is no longer just a question of environmental friendliness, prices, but also the availability and stability of supplies. I also use your natural voice to say, Madam Director General, please let's work together on energy prices. Because we in Europe can do what we need for ourselves. How should we compete? What should I say to our producers in Slovakia? Why is our electricity price so much higher compared to the United States? Okay, let's not compare ourselves to the Chinese. Someone may say that their standards when it comes to the environment are not the same as in Europe. How are we supposed to compete? Please don't make it a chance that Europe will become just an open-air museum of culture and museums because of these ideological decisions. We need to live, produce, and work here. That's why the topic of energy prices. What are we going to do with the automotive industry? How are we going to approach repowering? What are we going to do with nuclear, of course, going forward? These are important questions. This, and not some sanctions or whether we like something or not. Let's do our homework first. Let's be successful so that Europe is once again the place where life is best. In 2010, the so-called Lisbon strategy was supposed to be fulfilled. If I love that year, please correct me. I think it was written in the Lisbon strategy that in 2010, Europe, collectively the European Union, will be the best place in the world. In terms of quality of life and in terms of everything. In 2010, when I was already the Prime Minister, we realized that we were not the best. So we took the entire Lisbon strategy and threw it in the trash. Then came Agenda 2020. I don't even remember the names of those documents. It turned out the same way. We are now setting ourselves incredible energy goals. I am very much looking forward to the decision of the summit on Thursday in Germany regarding the ban on combustion cars in 2035. We will talk a lot about that. And I just believe that the European Union, the European Commission will take a different path than we have done so far. That we are adopting programs and goals that are unfeasible and that are directly damaging to us. Slovakia is and wants to be a stable member of the European Union. Slovakia wants to contribute to the success of the Union. But Slovakia is not a country that will remain silent. Even though someone considers us small and weak, but I will say it again, Slovakia is not a country that will remain silent. We are bound by the government's concept of a sovereign Slovak foreign policy, and this concept, which we are courageously promoting, is very open and clear to name. Therefore, please, if I said something in my speech that could disturb someone, I said it only because this is how I approach all the topics that I have to face, and I must admit that there have been more and more of these topics recently. Dear participants of the 18th Nuclear Energy Forum, make the most of the opportunities that such a hint provides. And I will be satisfied if, as I said at the beginning, one single sentence about the dialogue is spread without a core. It simply will not go further. Thank you for coming and for giving me the opportunity to speak before you. Thank you very much.